So one of the really important things that any pastor has to have uh, in order to provide spiritual leadership is a growing understanding of who is Christ and the person of Christ, the work of Christ. And I say that's a growing understanding because uh, anybody who comes to Christ, whether they come at a young age or they come at an older age, they always start off not having really any understanding. And so they need to grow in that understanding. And so part of being a pastor is to always be growing, always to be learning, always to be getting to a place where you can understand God more. Sometimes that comes from studying the Bible. And a lot of times it comes from living life and having your own needs to be able to bring before God and to actually experience the presence and the power of God in your life. And it comes from counseling people and seeing their struggle to see and experience the presence of power of God in their own lives. So there are a lot of different ways. So in other words, the longer a person is in ministry, the more they're going to grow. And technically, that should never stop because we are never, while we are alive in this flesh, we are never at a place where we can completely and utterly understand everything about God. So this sermon is all about trying to have a deeper understanding of the person and the works of Christ. And I've titled it Portrait of Christ. And so I got a picture of somebody who is actually drawing a portrait. I did not get this because I thought the picture looked like Jesus. That wasn't on my mind at all. I just wanted a picture of somebody actually drawing a portrait of somebody. That's all I was looking for the title, A Portrait of Christ. So our key question is, why is it important to know about the person and work of Christ? That's really important. And the key idea is that Jesus is eternal, powerful, and good. These are things that we need to know about him. But the reason why this is going to matter is that false expectations produce doubt and damage faith. That's just the way it is. People oftentimes bring false expectations to a relationship with God. They expect things that God has never set are part of his nature, that God has never promised to do in the way that people are asking. And so when they don't get their way, they become very heartbroken and disappointed. And they get to the point where they go, what's the point of praying to God and asking for his help? I've prayed before. I haven't gotten an answer. So what's the point? And really what should happen at that point is what we should be saying to people is, if you haven't been getting an answer, maybe you are not asking the right questions. You're not bringing the need to God in a way where you're actually prepared to hear the answer that he's going to give you. And oftentimes the answer that he gives requires a response of obedience. And that's another part of a person's Christian walk is, are they actually living in obedience? And we can say we're living in obedience. That's easy to do when everything is going just great. And we have everything that we want, the way we want it. Our health is good. We have, income coming in, and we can pay all of our bills, and we're healthy, and everything is fine. It's when any of the things in life start to get out of kilter and aren't going right that we then pray to God, and we want God to fix and to solve things. And oftentimes, what we really want is we want God to be Santa. We want to be able to say, this is what I want for Christmas, this is what I want you to bring me, and then we look to see that if God actually gave what we really wanted. And what God really wants is a relationship of trust, a relationship where you show that trust by being obedient to what he asks you to do. And that gets more and more difficult because oftentimes we have to get into places where we have to start becoming obedient to things that we really don't feel comfortable about, that we really aren't sure if God's going to be there for us when we obey. So this is important to have the right kind of expectations. And that's part of what this message is about, to give you the right kind of expectations. So we're in Hebrews chapter 1, starting in verse 1. And I skip over some verses because I really want to just focus on things that it reveals to us about Jesus, because the author of Hebrews is talking about Christ in comparison to the angels. And I just wanted, for our purposes today, to focus on Jesus, because the angels are a completely different kind of a being. You know, Jesus, being the Son of God, is a divine being. And that's not actually what the angels are. The angels are something else. So we want to understand this particular thing that's going on with him. So we have the first 3 verses, and then we have 8 through 12. And that's on page 846 of the Pew Bible. And in verse 1 and the beginning of verse 2, it says, "Long ago, God spoke many times and in many ways to our ancestors through the prophets. And now in these final days, he has spoken to us through his Son. God promised everything to his Son as an inheritance, and through the Son, he created the universe." So one of the things I'm going to be doing all through this sermon with the different sermon slides is I'm going to be talking about the person, and then I'm going to be talking about the work as we see it in each verse that we're looking at. So the person is identified as the Son of God. That's what we see. So that's a definition of his person. And we see in his person that he is a divine being. Whereas you and I are human beings, he is a divine being. And as a divine being, his work includes creating the universe. So we see that that's part of the work that he does. And that tells us something really important about a divine being. A divine being has authority and power over things that other beings don't have. People who get all excited and they're just like really into angels, they have images of angels everywhere in their world, and it's just angel this, angel that, and they're putting their focus and they're putting their worship on something other than the divine being, which is God. They're putting it on a lesser being. Their focus is not where it should be. And so we look at Jesus Christ being a divine being, and we recognize that just by being a divine being, he is worthy of our praise and worthy of our worship. And because he's a divine being, then we see that part of his work is creation. And that tells us something about him. It tells us that he has a level of intelligence and understanding of things that goes far beyond anything that you and I have, and that he can see things that you and I are not able to see. He can understand things that you and I are not able to understand. And so therefore, knowing that, we should willingly submit ourselves to that and recognize that if he's giving us some sort of an instruction or command, that probably that's the thing that we should be paying attention to. That's the thing that we should be doing. So this power that he has to be able to create is very, very important. Going into verse 3, or maybe this is 2a, I don't know, I may have mislabeled it. The Son radiates God's own glory and expresses the very character of God, and he sustains everything by the mighty power of his command. When he had cleansed us from our sins, he sat down in the place of honor at the right hand of the majestic God in heaven. So we see a couple of things that are going on here. The person. So the person is humble because the person radiates, expresses, and gives honor. So that's something about the person of Christ, the humility that's there. And of course, if we want to imitate our Savior, then humility is one of these things that we have to imitate. And what does it mean? Well, it means like we're going to put the focus and the attention. We're going to allow others to see God in us. We're going to be able to allow others to see how God works in and around us. Unfortunately, we live in a culture which has decided that faith is private and personal. It's like, you can believe and worship anything you want. You just should keep it quiet and keep it to yourself. That goes completely against what we should be doing. If we're going to be looking at the person of Christ and to see that he radiates glory and honor, that he expresses glory and honor, he gives glory and honor to his Father in heaven, then that should be the way that we live also. We should be willing to have big, loud mouths about God and what he has done for us. We should not be hiding it under a bushel. No, we shouldn't be doing that. It should be out there where everybody can see it. And so, if we're going to be like our Savior, then we want to understand his person, and then we want to be able to become like that so that we can do things the way he does them. It also says that he uses his power for good, and it told us that because he sustains and he cleanses. So he uses his power for good. And so therefore, you're seeing an ethical, moral work that is an expression of his character. He uses what he has to do good. So that is the work, but it's also an expression of his person, of his nature. And therefore, we should be wanting to do things that are good. We should be wanting to find opportunities to do good works, to do things that are beneficial and helpful to others as God has equipped and empowered us to be able to do it. In other words, if God hasn't given you the opportunity to be, you can see a need, and you're looking at it, you're going, God, unless you give me something, I can't see. Unless you show me that I've got something that I haven't become aware of. Unless you open my mind and my heart to understand how I can take what you have given to me, then I see a need that's here, but I really don't understand how I can meet that need. But then again, you might come across somebody else and you go, you know what? I know somebody who needs exactly what you have. Would you be willing to do it? And if God has prepared them to be able to accept that kind of a message, you can literally speak prophetically to them and tell them that there is a place where they can do what God has equipped them to be able to do. And if they're actually anxious to be able to serve God, they are going to be excited. They're going to be grateful. They're going to think, wow, this was great information. Thank you so much. You have really blessed me by showing me something that I can do with what God has given to me. So this is the way that we should be living our lives if we're going to be looking at the humble person, and we're going to be looking at the way he uses his nature and character to do things that are good. We should be wanting to do that as well. Soulflex. How am I changed when I'm cleansed from my sin? So that's going to be one of the conversations that we have, and hopefully we'll come up with things that maybe that we hadn't even thought of or realized before. Now I'm going to switch over to verse 8. And it says, but to the Son he says, your throne, O God, endures forever and ever. You rule with a scepter of justice. So the Son actually has a throne that shows honor and power to him. So he has a throne. And so he's supposed to do work which is ruling with justice. The idea of justice is important. That goes back to what it said previously about doing the things that are good. You can't do good unless you're bringing justice. So this idea of justice is really important. You can't be saying, and praising and thanking God for his justice. And yes, he's my Lord and he brings justice, and I worship that. And then you turn around and you commit an injustice to another person. If you are committing injustice, you are doing things that actually are harmful to other people, that cut them down, that insult them. You know, I grew up with a family member who liked to make cutting remarks. I was a kid. What did I know? I just thought that was something that you did. So I learned how to do the same thing as well. And after I got married, Cindy pointed that out to me, especially when we had kids, and I had to really stop and rethink what I was doing based on what I had learned growing up. And so I look back on that and I realized that injustice had been committed against me. I learned to practice injustice, and therefore, if I was going to become more like Christ and do what God wanted me to do, then I needed to face that truth, and I needed to have God help me to be able to change. I had to realize that that was something that I needed to have change in me so that I was not bringing injustice. Because you can't talk about the justice of God and how much you love the Lord and you follow him and he's important in your life, and then you turn around and you practice injustice. It doesn't work. And so what I'm telling you is that this is one of these things. You have to look at your life and you have to look at it honestly before God. And then when you assess what it is, then you have to be able to say, okay, God, I can see that there is something here that needs to be worked on. There's something there that needs to be worked on. I need your help. And so, Lord, I need to change, and I need you to help me to be able to change, because you rule with justice. I'd like to live my life where I am practicing justice with everyone, not just talking about it, flapping my gums and moving my lips and saying a good line. I want to actually do it. I want to do it for real. I want to do it where everybody who knows me sees me as somebody who is just and who brings justice. This is what Jesus does. So therefore, it should be something that we would want to do as well. So the justice question is, why doesn't God give us the freedom and healing that we ask for? That's a pretty interesting question. I had brought it up before during the gospel reading. And let's see if we have an answer. The problem is we want easy answers and quick fixes. But God wants to renew your mind and transform your soul. You see, God has a different agenda than what you have. And I go on with the answer. Because we are stubborn and resist God, it takes time and pain. So this really becomes the answer to the question is, if God is saying that he's going to give freedom and healing, that is what the gospel reading said. If God says that's what he's going to do, then, so when I ask for it, how come I don't ask for it? And the answer is that we're not actually asking God to renew our mind and to transform our soul. We're not asking for that. Because that's the hard thing to be able to ask for. It's hard because we have to then address, admit, and own things about ourselves which are not very complimentary. Things that we want to avoid. We have to do that. That's a hard thing to be able to do. And once we get to the point of actually identifying the things that need renewal and need transformation, then we have to ask God, it's like, okay, so what do I have to do in order to have my mind renewed and my soul transformed? What do I have to do? What do you want? God's going to give you instructions. And that's what you're going to have to obey. So the question is, if you really don't want to have to be obedient to God, then don't ask. Don't ask for help. Just live in the swill of your sin and disappointment and hardship in life. But if you think, well, no, that's not really good. I don't really like that. I'd like something to be better. Okay, God can give you freedom and God can give you healing. But he's going to take you on a path that at the moment that you ask, you don't realize that that's the path he's going to take you on. He's going to ask you to walk in a direction. And it's going to be a direction where you have to walk by faith, not by sight. Where you're going to have to do things that God tells you to do, not things that you've always done before. Because let's face it, if you need freedom and you need healing in some area of your life, whatever you've been doing, it hasn't worked up to now. So therefore, you don't want to keep walking by sight. You don't want to keep walking by what you've always done. You want to start walking down a path you've never walked before. You want to walk down a path that chances are you can't even see more than maybe a few inches to a foot in front of you. You just don't know where you're going. And so you're saying to God, okay, on this I am blind. You're just going to have to lead me, and I'm going to have to trust you. That's a hard place to be at. But that's the only way that we get to the renewal of the mind and the transforming of the soul. You can be stubborn. You can resist. You'll keep living in the pain and difficulty that you have, or you can freely give yourself over to God. But this is what has to happen. And I've seen it more than once where somebody has an issue that they want to have resolved, but they're not willing to do the things that God asks them to do. They're not willing to go to a space where they feel like they can't control things. We have a major problem in our culture today where people are suffering from anxiety. Anxiety is the fear of not being able to control something. When people feel like they're going to lose control, they become very, very anxious when they feel that they don't have the control. And so sometimes God says, I want you to do something that makes you feel uncomfortable. A lot of people feel uncomfortable being around other people. God says, I want you to be around other people. Go to church. I want you to sit in a church with other people. Yeah, but Lord, I don't know anything about the Bible. I don't know anything about church. I know I'm going to say something that's wrong. I know I'm going to feel stupid. And God says, if you're going to trust me, I will bring you to the point where you no longer have anxiety about being around people. Are you willing to trust me? There has to be a first step of faith to trust God. There has to be that. And unfortunately, there are too many people who are not free from anxiety because they are prisoners of anxiety. That's one of the places in which they have to be set free, one of the things that they have to be healed of. That's one of the most common things in our culture today, and it's like an epidemic. When I was growing up, I almost never encountered somebody who suffered from anxiety. That was very, very rare. People they didn't live that way. That wasn't the way the culture was. I'm not quite sure why it changed and why it's that way now. It just is. And so God can solve this. God can give a person freedom, and God can heal them of this. But they have to be willing to do what God wants them to do. They have to trust him. And that's what's important. Verse 9. You love justice and hate evil. Therefore, O God, your God has anointed you, pouring out the oil of joy on you more than on anyone else. So in this we see the person, the just character. And just character, we're talking about somebody who is righteous, somebody who is virtuous, somebody who has integrity. And so that's what it says. This is what you love. You love righteousness. You love virtue and integrity. This is part of the character of Christ. And since that's part of the character of Christ, when we see it defined here, we're supposed to look at that and say, I think that's supposed to be my character too. If I'm going to be like Christ, if I'm going to be Christ-like, then I have to have the same character. Okay? So, do I really practice virtue? Yeah, sometimes. Other times, maybe not. Do I have integrity? In a few areas. In 100%? Probably not. So we need to be honest about ourselves to be able to say, okay, God, you need to work on helping me to develop a character which is like your character. And when it says for work, everything he does is right and everything he does is good. And so that becomes one of the reasons why when he asks you to do something, to trust him so that you can have freedom and you can have healing, you have to be able to say, well, I know that he's just, and I know that his work, everything that he does is right and everything that he does is good. Therefore, based on that, even though I have no idea what's really going to happen next, since I really don't have the opportunity to control my situation, I think I am going to have to trust him. I'm going to have to obey him. I'm going to have to do that because everything that he does is right and everything he does is good. And now he's asking me to do something and to do it his way. Do I believe him? Do I trust him? Will I obey him? That becomes a test. Verse 10. He also says to the Son, in the beginning, Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth and made the heavens with your hands. So here we see, because of the hands, that's actually symbolic in the ancient world to talk about like the right hand of God. That was talking about being powerful, to have a hand that could be able to do something. That was an idea of power. And you know, I know somebody in my family who has very powerful hands. And because this person has powerful hands, the one thing we don't want this person to ever do in our house is to put a lid on a jar and tighten it. Because if it happens, then we can't get it off until this person with the powerful hands comes back and takes it off for us. That's just the way it is. So when you see this idea of, you know, the hand of God, you're seeing that it's powerful. It has the ability to do something that the rest of us are not able to do. And so this is symbolic language, but this is symbolic language which is actually making a point for us that as a person, he has power. And he uses that power how? To make the earth and the heavens. That's how he uses his power. And he uses his power in other ways, but that's what's described here. And so, if you are being asked to obey somebody who does everything right and does everything good and has power, so therefore can be in charge of what you're doing, so therefore, because everything they do is good, that means they're going to keep you safe and they're going to protect you, then to be willing to do the very thing that he wants you to do should be easy to obey. What gets in the way is we have our own set of fears. We have to trust him rather than trusting our fears. Verse 11, they will perish, but you remain forever. They will wear out like old clothing. You will fold them up like a cloak and discard them like old clothing. But you are always the same. You will live forever. So now we see that the person is eternal and unchanged. And this is important. It doesn't mean that you can't pray to him and he won't change his mind about something and honor your request and give you what you're asking for in a prayer. Oh no, he will listen. And he can change his mind. When it talks about him unchanging, it means that his nature of goodness, his nature of power and authority, his nature of being able to know everything and to be able to see anything, that stuff never changes. His sense of righteousness and virtue and integrity, that never changes. That is unchanging. That is eternal. It's important that those things are unchanging. Because how could we ever trust and obey if we thought the very things that we were having to trust and obey could suddenly change on us? That wouldn't work. So we see that he's eternal and he's unchanged. But we also see in this, and I want you to see that you will fold them up like a cloak and discard them, like old clothing. In other words, this is actually talking about the fact that he not only has the power to judge and to bring the present heaven and earth to an end before he makes a new heaven and earth. He has the power to be able to do that. And it says that he will do that. He actually has a will to do that. So in other words, he's going to bring about justice. And he's going to do it at the right time, in the right way. And so we're trusting him to bring about the justice that we so desperately need in our lives, based on the sin that we are surrounded by. We need justice. We need to know that justice is going to be coming. So it's important to understand these things about his person and about the things that he does, that he's going to be doing work, because it isn't necessarily all about what you and I go through minute by minute, and we have a whim like, wow, I just saw that shiny car. I'd like to have a shiny car like that. I'm going to go see if I can get one. That's a whim of the moment, which is vastly different from God knowing what you need and providing you what you need, and sometimes going, okay. The way parents are at Christmas time. One of our sons figured there had to be a Santa Claus because he goes, and he was telling one of his kids in school this, he goes, I know Santa is real because my parents would never buy the stuff I get at Christmas time. That had to come from Santa. It couldn't come from my parents. They wouldn't do that. So when he finally got to that age where he was starting to realize that Santa wasn't real, and we had to remind him, he goes, when you used to say that, Santa had to give you all that cool stuff that you really liked getting, do you realize who is really giving it to you? And he looks at us and he's like, you were the ones who were really doing that for me? Yeah, we were. And so what I'm saying is sometimes when you want things like the shiny new car, I'm not saying that God's going to give you a shiny new car because you asked for it, but when you want something like that, and you ask God for it, once in a while, he does give you some of those shiny, cool things that you want. Just like a parent does that for their children because they love their children and they want them to have it. God is that way with us at times. He's not that way with us all the time. But once in a while we're going through life, he gives us those kinds of little rewards and incentives. He does it. He gives us blessings. Sometimes the blessing isn't a material thing. Sometimes the blessing is even more significant because he brings people into our lives. He allows us to be able to connect with people. He allows us not only to have people in our lives to love, but he allows us to have people in our lives who love us. God blesses us. And so, yes, he's going to bring about judgment. He's going to bring about judgment because there's sin in the world. And sin needs to be dealt with. And because he's a lover of justice, he is going to deal with that. There will come a time when he will deal with it, because that's part of his nature of being virtuous and righteous. He can't allow sin to be left unattended. That's just the way he is. So our summary here of everything that I found in the passage pertaining to the person of Christ: he's the Son of God, he's humble, he's eternal, he's righteous, and he's unchanging. That's who he is. His work includes creation and the sustaining of what he created, the heavens and the earth. The cleansing of sin. When people go to him and say, I realize I'm a sinner and I need you to cleanse me of that and forgive me of that, I'm going to follow you. He does it. And then his work is that he rules and he judges with justice. These are his works. These are the things that we can know about God And these are the things that we can lean on and depend upon as we live our lives. And as we see that God is asking us to do something that we feel like, Lord, you're asking me to go someplace I really don't want to go. You're asking me to do something I feel really uncomfortable about. You're asking me to do something that I've always tried to avoid. You're asking me to do something that in the past I've always run as far away from you as I could because I didn't want to do it. But now that I know that you rule with justice, I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to try to do what you ask me to do because I trust you. I have no idea how it's going to turn out. I don't know what your plan is, but I'm just going to trust it. So our truth nugget is we are safe because Christ rules with justice. This idea of safety is really, really important. People need to see that they are safe. Because if you're going to step out on faith and go down a path where you can't see exactly where you're going and you have no idea how it's going to turn out, and it seems like God has told you in no uncertain terms that this is what he wants you to do, then you need to know that everything he does is good and everything he does is right and that he rules with justice. And therefore you can obey because guess what? You're safe. When you're under his care, you're always safe. So our takeaway number one, help me to understand the person and work of your Son. This is one of those things. As you grow in your relationship, the more you find that you need to trust God, the more ways in which you need to step out on faith, that's going to be when you start to understand the person and work of Christ. That's when the portrait of Christ is going to become more clear and more obvious to you. Understanding doesn't come from just studying and book learning and head knowledge. Understanding comes from living with and seeing and following and obeying. There's a kind of understanding that comes through a life of obedience to God that you can't have until you have started to practice obedience. And if you're trying to be set free from something that's held you captive, you're not going to be set free until you've obeyed. And then you'll be able to go, oh, now I know more about God. Number two, give me peace in the truth about your Son. See, we need to have peace. If we're going to feel like we're really safe, then we have to have real peace about it. This idea of being safe because he rules with justice, you need God to give you peace. You need to just have the peace where you can say, okay, Lord, I can relax. I can do the things that you're asking me to do. And this is a cool idea. If you fail, you own it, you confess it, you repent of it, and then you start obeying him again. It's that simple. But how many times can I fail before the Lord gets tired of me? Well, I don't think he ever does. Remember, he's eternal and unchanging. So therefore his love is eternal and unchanging. So that means until the day comes when he actually completely and utterly makes you new, where your salvation is complete, until that time, he will forgive you and restore you as many times as you need. Therefore, be at peace in the truth about his Son.